The Lonely Rancher and the Wild Horse. Asa Whitlock's day began before the sun dared to peek over the jagged peaks of the Bridger Mountains. A familiar chill permeated the small cabin, a constant companion in the early hours that even the crackling fire in the hearth couldn't fully dispel. He swung his legs out of the narrow cot, the floorboards groaning a protest beneath his worn boots. Coffee, black and bitter, was the first order of business, followed by a quick shave with a well-honed straight razor, his reflection in the dim mirror a familiar landscape of lines etched by sun and solitude. Out in the barn, the lowing of cattle and the snorts of horses provided the only conversation. Asa moved with unpracticed economy of motion, forking hay into mangers, checking water troughs, his movements precise and unhurried. The ranch was his life, his legacy, and his burden. Each fence post hammered, each bale of hay stacked, each calf nursed back to health, was a testament to his relentless will. Yet beneath the stoic exterior, a quiet ache often settled, particularly in the lengthening evenings when the only sound was the wind whispering through the lodgepoles. His gaze lingered on the far stall, where a young Mustang stallion, a creature of raw, untamed power, snorted and pawed the ground. Storm, Asa had named him, for the thunder in his eyes and the tempest in his spirit. 3 years old now, and still unbroken. Asa had tried, God knows he had. He'd spent countless hours in that stall, speaking in low, even tones, offering grain from his palm, trying to bridge the chasm between man and beast. But Storm remained a whirlwind of muscle and distrust. His eyes, dark and intelligent, regarded Asa with a wary defiance. Every attempt to saddle him ended in a flurry of hooves and a splintered gait. The last time, Storm had bitten clean through the thick leather of Asa's glove, leaving a painful reminder on his knuckles. The sky, which had been a brilliant cloudless blue at dawn, now began to bruise. A peculiar stillness descended, the kind that precedes a reckoning. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost electric charge. The horses in the pasture grew restless, their tails twitching, their ears swiveling nervously. Asa, leaning against the fence post, noticed the shift immediately. He'd seen enough Montana storms to read the signs. This wouldn't be a gentle rain. A low growl rumbled in the distance, a sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots. The wind, which had been a playful breeze, now began to whip and moan, tearing at the leaves on the cottonwoods. Dark, swirling clouds boiled over the mountains, painting the world in shades of charcoal and slate. Asa's jaw tightened. He needed to secure everything. He rushed to latch the barn doors, checking the windows on the cabin, pulling in anything that could become a projectile. The first fat drops of rain splattered against the dry earth, kicking up miniature clouds of dust before giving way to a relentless deluge. Lightning ripped across the sky, a jagged white scar, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that shook the very foundations of the ranch. The wind shrieked, a banshee's wail, tearing at the eaves of the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, a furious drumming that drowned out all other sound. Asa stood by the window, watching the fury unfold. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches thrashing like wild things. He could barely see the barn through the sheeting rain, a dark, stoic silhouette against the chaos. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pricked at him. He was alone out here, just him and the land, at the mercy of the elements. He thought of Storm, his wild spirit, and wondered how the young stallion was faring in the tempest. He could only hope the barn would hold. A mended mystery. The wind, a relentless sculptor, had carved new lines across the landscape during the night. Asa, his shoulders stiff from the day's earlier chores, pulled his heavy coat tighter as he surveyed the damage. The storm, which had finally blown itself out before dawn, had left a trail of splintered timber and torn wire in its wake. His primary concern was the north pasture fence, bordering the old creek bed, where Storm, his spirited Mustang, often grazed. A breach there, and the young horse would be halfway to the foothills by noon. He rode out, the air crisp and carrying the scent of wet pine and distant wood smoke. The ground was slick in places, the earth still saturated. As he approached the stretch of fence he'd been dreading, a knot tightened in his stomach. He expected to see a gaping maw, jagged posts pointing skyward like broken teeth. Instead, he reined in abruptly, his horse shifting beneath him. There it was, the segment he knew had been utterly destroyed, standing straight and true. Not just patched, but perfectly mended. New timber, freshly planed and still pale against the weathered older posts, formed a robust barrier. The wire, taut and gleaming, caught the weak morning light. It was a flawless repair, better than he himself might have managed in the fading light of yesterday. Confusion, sharp and sudden, pricked at him. He dismounted, walking slowly along the repaired section, his gloved fingers tracing the smooth grain of the new wood. There were no tracks beyond his own, no telltale signs of a wagon or another rider. The work had been done with a quiet efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Who would do such a thing? And why in secret? He was a solitary man, his ranch a remote island in the vast Montana territory. No neighbor was close enough, nor charitable enough, to undertake such an arduous task without so much as a word. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, snaked down his spine. The unease, initially a prickle, grew into a distinct thrumming beneath his ribs. Was it a drifter, seeking work he couldn't offer? A prankster, though the meticulousness of the repair argued against such a motive. Or was there something more unsettling at play? The thought of an unknown presence working silently on his land in the dead of night was unsettling. Yet, beneath the apprehension, a different emotion began to bloom. Gratitude. A deep, unexpected warmth spread through him. The storm had left him with a daunting list of repairs, and this one, perhaps the most critical, had been taken care of. He ran a hand over a new post, the wood firm and unyielding. Whoever they were, they had done him a great service. He scanned the horizon, the endless sky a muted gray. No answers presented themselves, only the quiet hum of the mended fence, a mystery now woven into the fabric of his solitary life. The Quiet Woman and the Tamed Beast. The wind, carrying the sharp scent of pine and impending rain, whipped at Asa's hat as he approached the corral. He'd braced himself for the usual chaos. The powerful Mustang, Storm, snorting and pawing, his wild eyes reflecting the morning sun. Instead, a peculiar stillness hung in the air. Storm stood motionless, his massive head lowered, a bridle snug on his face, the reins draped over a post. A saddle, worn leather gleaming, rested on his broad back. Asa blinked, convinced the early hour was playing tricks on his eyes. Storm, the horse no one could gentle, was saddled. Beside the fence, a woman knelt, her back to him. She wore a simple, patched dress and a sturdy canvas apron, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid. Her hands, surprisingly small yet capable, moved with a focused precision, retensioning a loose strand of wire on the lower rail. He noticed the section of fence had been recently reinforced, the wood fresh and sturdy where it had been splintered by the last gale. This wasn't the work of a passing drifter. He cleared his throat. The woman froze, then slowly rose, turning to face him. Her eyes, the color of deep river stone, held a quiet intensity, but no fear. They were kind, he realized, despite the guarded set of her jaw. A small, almost imperceptible smudge of grease marked her cheek. She didn't speak, merely watched him with an unblinking gaze that felt both assessing and understanding. That's Storm, Asa managed, his voice rougher than he intended. He gestured vaguely at the tranquil Mustang. "He is," she replied, her voice soft, a low murmur like a mountain stream. "A good horse." She moved with an unhurried grace, reaching out to gently stroke Storm's muzzle. The Mustang, far from shying away, leaned into her touch, a soft nicker rumbling in his chest. Asa had never seen such a thing. "Who are you?" he asked, his bewilderment overriding his usual caution. "Iris Bell," she said, her gaze returning to his. She didn't offer more, didn't elaborate on why she was there, or how she'd tamed the untamable. She simply was. Iris then turned back to the fence, pulling a small hammer from her apron pocket. Without a word, she began to tap a nail back into a sagging crossbeam, her movements economical and strong. The rhythmic tink-tink of the hammer against metal filled the silence. Asa watched, fascinated, as she worked with an innate efficiency, her attention entirely focused on the task. She wasn't asking for work or for lodging. She was simply doing. He noticed the small, nearly invisible repairs everywhere. The gate that had always groaned now swung smoothly. A pile of split firewood, neatly stacked, sat beside the barn, far more uniform than his own haphazard attempts. She wasn't just fixing the fence. She was, piece by piece, mending the ranch itself. And with Storm standing quietly beside her, something inside Asa, something he hadn't known was broken, began to feel a subtle shift, a quiet mending of its own. The storm was coming, but for the first time in a long time, Asa felt a strange sense of preparedness, a quiet certainty that things might just be all right. A home rebuilt. The scent of pine tar and sawdust clung to Iris as she moved through the ranch, a quiet force against decay. The persistent drip, drip, drip from the bunkhouse roof, a sound Asa had long since tuned out, was now a memory. Iris had spent the better part of a morning up on the shingles, a hammer in her gloved hand, replacing rotted wood and sealing cracks with meticulous care. The air inside the bunkhouse, once carrying the damp chill of neglect, began to warm, infused with the dry, clean smell of fresh lumber. Asa watched her from the porch, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hand. He'd intended to ride out to check the north pasture, but found himself rooted, observing. She was now wrestling with the main corral gate, its rusted hinges groaning a protest every time it swung. With a wrench and a pot of grease, she systematically dismantled, cleaned, and reassembled it. The gate, once a sagging, obstinate thing, now moved with a smooth, satisfying click. There was a rhythm to her work, a quiet determination that spoke volumes without a single uttered word. The ranch was breathing again. The small, forgotten tasks that had accumulated into a mountain of disrepair were slowly, steadily being chipped away. A loose board on the porch, a broken latch on the feed shed, even a crooked picture frame in the main house, all found themselves straightened, mended, or replaced. It wasn't just the physical structures. A subtle shift in the very atmosphere of the place was palpable. The air felt lighter, less burdened by the weight of Asa's solitary years. Storm, the wild Mustang who had once defied every attempt at braking, was a testament to this change. Asa had ridden him that morning, a quiet, almost domestic ride around the perimeter of the home pasture. The horse, usually a bundle of coiled energy and suspicion, walked with a relaxed gait, his ears flicking towards Asa's soft murmurs. He no longer shied from Asa's touch, even accepted the brush with a soft snuffle. Iris had simply been with Storm, not breaking him, but gently guiding him, showing him trust. Asa saw it now, in the horse's calm eyes, a reflection of the peace Iris brought. He found Iris later, inspecting a section of fence line near the creek, her brow furrowed in concentration. "That roof's not leaked a drop since you fixed it," he said, his voice a little gruffer than he intended. She turned, her eyes, the color of a winter sky, meeting his. "Good, Storm's going to need a dry stall when that squall hits next week." Her words were practical, devoid of self-congratulation. Asa nodded, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He thought of the impending storm, the one that had usually filled him with a solitary dread. This year, with Iris here, and Storm no longer a wild, untamed spirit, the dread was replaced by a quiet preparedness. The ranch, once a monument to his endurance, was becoming something more. A home, rebuilt, one quiet repair at a time. The empty kitchen. The first light of dawn was a bruised purple against the eastern peaks when Asa's eyes flickered open. The familiar chill of the pre-storm morning seeped through the window panes, promising the blizzard that had been brewing for days. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the rough wool blanket tangling around his ankles for a moment before he shook it free. His boots, worn and comfortable, were exactly where he'd left them, by the door. He pulled on his heavy canvas jacket, the scent of horse and honest labor clinging to the fabric. Usually, a faint aroma of coffee, strong and black, would already be wafting from the kitchen by now, perhaps mingled with the sweet earthiness of sourdough. Iris was an early riser, her quiet movements a counterpoint to the creaking of the old ranch house. Asa always found a peculiar comfort in knowing she was there, a steady presence in the sprawling silence of his life. But this morning, the air was still, heavy with the impending storm and nothing else. No clatter of cast iron, no soft hum of a tune whistled under her breath. Asa paused at the threshold of the kitchen, his hand still on the doorframe. The room was bathed in the dim gray light filtering through the single window, revealing the stark outlines of the worn pine table, the sturdy chairs, and the cold, unlit stove. The kindling box was untouched, the coffee pot sat empty on the hearth. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, began to spread through him. "Iris," he called out, his voice a little rougher than usual in the quiet space. The only answer was the rustle of wind against the eaves. He walked to the stove, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Not even ashes from last night's fire. That was odd. She always banked the coals, ready for the morning. He moved through the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the familiar items, the jar of dried herbs, the neatly stacked plates, the flour sack. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything felt wrong. Her apron, usually hanging on a peg by the pantry, was gone. The small carved wooden bird she kept on the windowsill was still there, but it seemed to stare out at an empty world. A sudden, deeper dread propelled him towards her room. The door stood ajar, revealing a sliver of the small, tidy space. He pushed it open fully. The narrow bed was neatly made, the patchwork quilt smoothed over the mattress. Her small leather satchel, which she always kept by her bedside, was gone. The simple dress she usually wore was nowhere to be seen, nor were her sturdy boots. The small tin of sketching pencils she occasionally used lay on the bedside table, but the pad of paper it usually accompanied was missing. Asa stood in the center of the room, the silence pressing in on him. The chill in the air had nothing to do with the coming storm now. It was a cold, hollow ache that settled deep in his chest. She was gone. Not just out for an early walk, not just fetching water from the well. Gone. Without a word, without a note, just as she had been before, a profound sense of loss, sharp and unexpected, twisted in his gut. Confusion gnawed at him. Why? After all this time, after she had unpacked, after she had promised to stay. The empty kitchen, the vacant room, echoed with a silence that was far louder than any storm. The long search begins. The Montana wind, a tireless carver of the landscape, plucked at the brim of Asa's hat. Days bled into weeks, then months, measured solely by the changing hues of the immense territory. He rode, not with the familiar swing of a rancher inspecting fences, but with the tightly wound vigilance of a hunter on a cold track. "Iris!" he'd bellow, his voice swallowed by the boundless sky, her name echoing through canyons and across undulating plains. His gaze, typically keen for livestock or impending storms, now scoured for the merest twitch of movement, a dropped trinket, any sign of her passage. Dust motes danced in the golden shafts of sunlight, but never the longed-for silhouette. Initial despair had been a stifling shroud, suffocating his will. He'd slumped in the saddle, the quiet of the vacant ranch pressing in, unanswered questions gnawing at his peace. But Asa Whitlock was not a man to yield to emptiness. He was a builder, a mender, an endurer. If Iris Bell had repaired his fences and gentled his wildest Mustang, he would certainly locate her. His resolve solidified, a flinty determination hewn from the same stubborn rock as the surrounding mountains. He began with the nearest settlements, sun-baked outposts clinging to railroad tracks or nestled beside a winding river. The general store in Willow Creek offered little beyond sympathetic glances and a vague memory of a quiet woman who purchased a bolt of plain calico. Helpful she was, the proprietor mumbled, polishing a jar of horehound drops. Fixed Mrs. Henderson's leaky roof for a bit of coin. Didn't talk much, though. In Sweetgrass, a grizzled blacksmith recalled a woman with capable hands who'd sharpened his tools with unexpected precision. Said she was passing through. Never heard a complaint, even when the flies were thick enough to carry a man off. Each fragment of information was a single thread, painstakingly gathered, hinting at a pattern but never quite revealing the whole intricate design. She was a phantom, a murmur, leaving behind small acts of kindness and a wake of quiet competence. Asa pressed onward, his horse's hooves churning the dry earth, his own face growing gaunter, etched by the relentless pursuit. He learned to decipher the subtle markers, a recently doused campfire, the faint imprint of a smaller boot in the mud by a watering hole, the path a lone rider might choose to skirt the roughest terrain. The descriptions grew more consistent, a woman of average height, always neatly clad despite the dust, with eyes that seemed to hold unspoken narratives. A woman who fixed things, a woman who moved on. The trail stretched long, and the breadcrumbs were sparse, but Asa rode, propelled by a singular, unyielding purpose. He would find her. The ranch awaited, and so did he. A pattern revealed. Asa's boots, once sturdy and unyielding, now carried the faint scuff of countless miles, each one a testament to his relentless pursuit. He'd followed the whispers of Iris Bell from the dusty main street of Junction City, through the sprawling ranches bordering the Muscle Shell, and now into the gentler, rolling hills of Fergus County. His face, once firm, was leaner, the lines etched around his eyes deeper, but the fire in them burned undimmed. He'd spent his life building, enduring, and this search for Iris was no different. A new kind of structure he was determined to complete. He spoke to blacksmiths who remembered a quiet woman who helped organize their ledgers for a few months, saloon keepers who recalled her briefly filling in as a cook, and homesteaders whose dilapidated barns she'd helped shore up against the winter winds. Each encounter was a fragment, a piece of a puzzle he was slowly assembling, not with wood and nails, but with fleeting memories and half-forgotten anecdotes. She was a good hand, a grizzled rancher in Lewistown told him, squinting into the afternoon sun. Helped me through lambing season when my wife took ill. Never asked for much, just a place to sleep and some food. And then, poof, gone. He snapped his fingers, a sound lost in the vastness of the Montana sky. Figured she was just a wanderer. The same story, with minor variations, echoed in every new place. Iris would appear, offer help where it was most needed, and then, just as she began to knit herself into the fabric of a community, she would vanish. Not with a fuss, not with goodbyes, but quietly, like a mist lifting with the dawn. Asa tracked her movements across a mental map, connecting the dots of her temporary residences. Junction City, 9 months. A small settlement near Mosby, 14 months. Lewistown, 8 months. A mining camp in the Judith Mountains, 17 months. The numbers began to repeat, to sing a subtle, unsettling tune in his mind. He pulled out a crumpled receipt from his pocket, a grocery list he'd found tucked under a loose floorboard in the cabin near Mosby. It was dated almost 2 years prior to his finding her at his ranch. He remembered the feeling of certainty when he'd first found her, the sense of a new beginning. But now, a different kind of pattern was emerging. Her stays never exceeded 24 months. Not once. She always left before 2 years were up, before roots could grow too deep, before attachments could solidify, before anyone could leave her first. It was a stark, heartbreaking revelation. Iris wasn't just a wanderer, she was an escape artist of the heart, forever one step ahead of vulnerability, perpetually breaking free before the chains could even be forged. The understanding settled in Asa's chest, heavy and cold, yet it also sharpened his resolve. He wasn't just chasing a woman, he was chasing a ghost of a past wound, a fear that kept her moving. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he wouldn't stop until he found her and broke this pattern. The confession. The sun, a weary eye in a dusty sky, beat down on the small settlement of Harmony Creek. Asa, his face leaner, his clothes bearing the grit of 2 counties, watched from the shade of a mercantile awning. He'd followed whispers, frayed threads of rumor leading him further and further from his own neglected spread. Then, there she was. Not amidst the usual bustle, but kneeling beside a broken wagon, her skilled hands inspecting a splintered spoke. A young mother, her face etched with worry, watched Iris with a desperate hope Asa recognized intimately. Iris, true to form, was offering solace and practical aid, her movements fluid and efficient as she began to direct the repair. He moved, a man propelled by an unseen current, crossing the sun-baked street. Iris, engrossed, didn't notice him until he stood a few feet away, his shadow falling across her work. Her head snapped up, eyes, the color of riverstone, widening in an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. The wrench in her hand clattered to the dust. "Asa," she breathed, the single word a fragile thing, laced with disbelief. He nodded, his throat tight. He hadn't rehearsed this, hadn't planned the exact words for this moment he'd craved for so long. The journey had worn him thin, but the sight of her, real and tangible, ignited a spark he hadn't realized had dimmed. "Took you long enough," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips, though her gaze was still wary, like a wild creature caught in a sudden light. "Long enough for what?" he countered, his voice rougher than he intended. "For you to vanish again? For another family to feel like you were their salvation, only to wake up one morning and find you gone?" Her shoulders stiffened. The easy competence that had radiated from her moments before evaporated, replaced by a familiar defensiveness. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her trousers. "I help where I'm needed, Asa. Then I move on." "And what about where you're needed even when you're not mending fences or breaking horses?" He took a step closer, forcing her to meet his gaze. "What about my ranch, Iris? What about Storm?" The mention of the horse seemed to pierce her carefully constructed composure. Her eyes softened, a flicker of genuine concern replacing the guardedness. "Storm hasn't been the same since you left," Asa continued, the words tumbling out, raw and honest. "He's restless, skittish, rears at shadows. Nobody can get near him, not like you did. It's like he knows something's missing, something that's settled him." He paused, taking a breath that felt like it scraped against his ribs. "And neither have I. The ranch, it feels empty, Iris, like a song cut short. I wake up and there's no coffee on the stove, no quiet hum of you working, just stillness, a hollowness that wasn't there before you came, and a bigger one since you left." Her gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in front of her. He could see the slight tremor in her fingers. The mask of the perpetual wanderer seemed to crack, revealing a glimpse of the vulnerable woman beneath. "I need you back, Iris," he confessed, the words tasting like truth on his tongue. "Not just for the ranch, not just for Storm, for me. I need you back." Unpacked. The crisp prairie wind, usually a balm, now felt like 1,000 tiny needles against Iris's skin. Asa's words, spoken with a quiet intensity that belied the weariness etched around his eyes, had pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. "The mare won't settle without you," he'd said, his voice raspy from weeks of relentless pursuit. "And neither will I." The simple declaration, devoid of grand theatrics or manipulative pleas, resonated with a truth she'd spent 2 years outrunning. He hadn't spoken of love, or forever, or even of wanting her. He'd spoken of need, a raw, undeniable need that mirrored the hollow ache in her own chest. He'd come for her. Not for some idealized version, not for the mended fences or the broken horse, but for Iris Bell, the woman who vanished. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, chasing away the chill. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in so long, a dangerous vulnerability. She looked at him, gaunter than she remembered, his hat pulled low, but his gaze unwavering. The stubborn set of his jaw, the faint tremor in his hand as he gripped the reins of his tired horse, these were the tells of a man who built things to last, who endured. And he had endured, for her. The journey back to the Whitlock ranch was mostly silent, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of hooves and the occasional creak of leather. Iris kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, the vast Montana sky a canvas for her churning thoughts. Each mile closer to the ranch felt like a step deeper into unknown territory, a place where her escape routes were no longer clearly defined. The familiar silhouette of the barn, then the sturdy lines of the farmhouse, emerged from the dusk. A knot formed in her stomach, a mixture of apprehension and a nascent, terrifying hope. She dismounted with a practiced ease, her movements fluid despite the tremor in her hands. Asa led the horses away, his shoulders slumping with relief, and the sudden quiet in the yard was deafening. Iris stood there for a long moment, the dust of her travels still clinging to her clothes, her worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. This bag had been her constant companion, a symbol of her transient existence, packed and ready for the next hurried departure. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the small room she had occupied before. It was just as she'd left it, the wooden floor scrubbed clean, the single window overlooking the pasture where the mare now grazed peacefully. The air, though stale from disuse, held a faint scent of pine and something else, something indefinable that felt like home. Slowly, deliberately, she unslung the bag. The leather creaked as she unbuckled the straps. One by one she removed the contents. A spare calico dress, a worn copy of Emerson, a small tin of salve, a faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes. Each item, usually handled with the quick efficiency of a traveler, was now placed with a reverence she hadn't known she possessed. The dress was smoothed and hung in the small wardrobe. The book found a place on the bedside table. The salve was set beside a chipped ceramic basin. Finally, the bag was empty. She folded it, not with the customary readiness for the next journey, but with a sense of finality. She placed it on the top shelf of the wardrobe, out of reach, out of mind. The simple act felt momentous, a quiet declaration against the wind. For the first time in 2 years, Iris Bell wasn't planning her departure. She was, quite simply, here. And the world, for the moment, felt perfectly still.